Maggie was literally tormented by hunger, experiencing a desperate desire to quell the agonizing hunger that had become nothing unusual or unexpected for her. Not long ago, 3 or even 4 weeks prior, thoughts about food didn't trouble her at all. Everything began to change the moment she lost her roof over her head and became homeless. How did it happen? Even Maggie couldn't quite understand. Her life until that moment had been full of comfort and familiar care. She lived in luxury, like a true queen, and could afford to choose what she ate and what to forgo. Her owner, whom Maggie adored, never overindulged her with dry food, striving to care for her health. Instead, she constantly delighted her beloved with fresh treats. Sour cream, homemade cottage cheese, juicy meat, and various vitamins. These small gastronomic joys were an everyday norm for Maggie. In return for such care, the cat repaid with boundless loyalty and sincere love. Their life together was harmonious, filled with coziness. But one day everything changed. On that ill-fated day, Maggie woke up expecting to see her usually full bowl. However, her expectations were not met. The bowl was completely empty. In the first moment, the cat was bewildered, trying to understand what was happening. She decided to wait, thinking it might just be a slight delay. Then, a feeling of resentment began to form in her little head, but everything seemed too strange. Her owner had never left Maggie without food before. While the cat was trying to figure things out, her attention was drawn to the sound of a phone ringing from her owner's room. At first, it rang once, then again and again. Strangely, her owner didn't respond to the calls. Anxiety gripped Maggie, and she resolutely headed to the room to find out what was happening. With her paws, she pushed the door open, peeked inside, and saw her owner lying motionless on the floor. Shocked, Maggie didn't know what to do. Her little heart clenched with worry, but there was no time to think. The sound of keys in the lock caught her attention. The door opened, and people Maggie had never seen before entered the apartment. They quietly conversed among themselves, creating an atmosphere of mystery. Then they lifted her owner and carried her out of the room. It was the last time Maggie saw her beloved owner. After the door slammed shut behind the strangers, the apartment plunged into deafening silence. Maggie was left alone, without food, without company, only with a bowl of water that couldn't quench her agonizing hunger. The little cat understood that her world had collapsed, but she couldn't come to terms with it. One thought tore her apart. What would happen now? When Maggie found herself on the street, realization didn't come immediately. Gradually, frightened and hungry, she began to understand that clean water was a true treasure. Wandering from one trash can to another, finding only stale bread, she couldn't find even a small puddle to quench her thirst. The desire to drink became unbearable with each passing hour. But this happened later. At first, she sat in the empty, cold apartment, plaintively meowing, begging for food. No one came, no one heard. Only after a whole week did the door fling open again. People she had seen before appeared, along with new faces. Happy, Maggie decided that she would finally be fed. She rushed towards them, meowing loudly, but no one paid attention to her. The people dismissively brushed her away, as if she were a pesky insect. Then her plaintive cries turned to pleas. Her strength was dwindling. One of the men approached, grabbed her by the scruff, and, showing her to the others, said, "This is the owner's cat. What are we going to do? Throw her out on the street?" He opened the door and tossed Maggie into the hallway. She froze, stunned. Hungry, frightened, and miserable, the cat hid in a dark corner and stayed there until nightfall. Only then, gathering her courage, did she dare to come out. She wanted to sleep, eat, and drink, but she didn't have the strength for everything at once. Climbing to the top floor, she found nothing but silence. Then, descending, she noticed that the lower floors were eerily dark and empty. The lights were on only in a few places, and the rest was pitch black. Out of fear, Maggie yowled. Her meowing awakened a resident on the first floor. The door opened, and the cat, hopeful, rushed towards the man. But he, showing no signs of kindness, threw her out into the night. Now Maggie found herself alone in a dark and unfamiliar world that she had only seen from the window. She thought, what could be scarier? Although life, as it turned out, had more challenges in store for her. Only later did Maggie realize how much she needed to drink. After a long search, she managed to find a tiny puddle. The water was stagnant and smelled unpleasant, but it was still water. The cat drank as much as she could. Soon, her attention was drawn to new smells, the scent of food, though spoiled. It had been a week of agonizing hunger, and even a moldy crust seemed like a delicacy to her. Quickly, fearing someone might take it away, Maggie gnawed on it, feeling her hunger ease slightly. It was then she heard the angry hissing of another cat. It was her rival, a vicious, hungry cat whipping her tail against her emaciated sides. She was preparing to attack the new adversary who dared to encroach on her territory. Other dangers also occurred. Malicious dogs that she had to escape from by climbing trees. People, annoyed by her plaintive cries, threw various objects at her. How Maggie survived all this time, she couldn't understand herself. Her once shiny and well-groomed fur became dirty, constantly sticking with debris. Bathing as before was neither possible nor within her strength. Maggie did her best to hold on, but deep down she knew. Her life had turned into a struggle for each new day. Once, driven only by her inexperience, she decided to climb into the attic and unexpectedly got stuck in fiberglass insulation. A tremendous amount of time passed, but the fur on her little tongue still held tiny shards of that treacherous glass, and blood continued to seep from her wounds. Maggie had long lost all interest in life, not caring how long she had to exist. Today, with her last bit of strength, she barely made it to the park. In this place, unlike crowded residential yards, there were significantly fewer cats. The reason was that the park was dominated by people walking their dogs. This forced Maggie to often seek refuge in the trees. However, at night, the bins near the benches became real treasure troves. Sometimes she managed to find remnants of food. Now, hiding in a tree from a huge dog, she had spent almost the entire day on a branch. Now she faced an urgent task, finding at least some water and food. Maggie, slowly descending from the branch of her secluded shelter, cautiously moved across the freshly cut grass, intending to explore the familiar territory of the park. At first, luck seemed to evade her, but soon she discovered a fresh piece of bread and a small piece of sausage. Grabbing her find, she quickly swallowed it, constantly looking around. One problem was solved. Another stood ahead, the search for water. The cat decided to go to where people drank from the fountain during the day. Usually, most of the water would spill onto the ground, and if she was lucky, there might still be some moisture there. But her thoughts were interrupted by an unexpected sound. It was a human moan. At first, Maggie turned away, thinking what business was it of another two-legged creature? People had only brought her suffering lately. But when the moan repeated, the cat, as if against her own will, decided to find out what was wrong. Carefully, almost creeping, she moved in the direction of the sound. Not far from a wooden bench, where she had recently found food, an elderly man lay on the grass. His eyes were closed, and his face showed agony. Maggie slowly circled him, watching closely. At one point, the man moaned again and awkwardly reached for a shiny object that buzzed in his hand. However, he couldn't quite reach it. The cat, slightly recoiling from the surprise, saw the man attempt to grab the vibrating device once more. Then his gaze fell upon Maggie, who was observing him from a distance. Suddenly, he whispered, "Please help." Maggie didn't immediately understand what was needed, but soon realized that the fallen man desperately needed the device. Approaching closer, she carefully nudged him with her paw. Then she repeated the action again and again until the phone was finally in the man's hand. At that moment, he picked up the receiver. "Yes, who is this?" he croaked in a weak voice. From the other end came a distressed female voice. "Dad, where are you right now? Why haven't you answered for so long?" "Daughter, I'm in the park, near our house by that big flower bed. I fell and couldn't reach the phone." "Dad, hold on. We're already on our way." The man exhaustedly leaned back onto the grass. His gaze found Maggie once more. "Thank you, Kitty," he whispered softly. "You just saved my life." Maggie remained sitting nearby, as if understanding that her help had truly made a difference. Thus, one small life, seemingly unnoticed and unwanted by anyone, did something incredible. It gave another life a chance to be saved. Maggie had just noticed a sign of gratitude when the sound of approaching footsteps reached her ears. Deciding not to stay, she quickly hid out of sight. She had more urgent matters at the moment. Because of her ordeal with the man, she hadn't managed to quench her thirst in time, and she still needed to search for food. The food she had found was too little to last long. Her life in the following days remained unchanged. The cat continued to inhabit the city park. She lived without planning ahead and was entirely focused on the present. During the day, while the sun shone, Maggie preferred to hide in tall trees, avoiding open spaces. Only deep at night, when everything around quieted down, did she come down to the ground to forage for food. One day, a heavy rainstorm broke out, soaking the cat to the skin. She suffered from the cold and dampness, but now she no longer had to search for water. It was plentiful around her. This significantly simplified Maggie's life. A whole week passed before she heard a familiar voice that sounded unexpectedly. "Look, I fell right here, and the window was right next to it. But most likely, she has long since left here. You know, daughter, for some reason I feel like she wasn't always a stray. I have the impression that she knew what a home was before, and maybe even what a phone was. Let's try to find her again." These two began calling the cat, trying to lure Maggie. However, she, hearing their voices clearly, didn't hurry to come out of her shelter. Caution had saved her life more than once, and the cat knew perfectly well that not all people could be trusted. The elderly man began telling something to his companion, while Maggie, closing her eyes, listened to his voice. It was such a kind and soothing voice that she stopped noticing the time. Although she didn't understand all the words the man spoke, the tone of his speech reminded her of her owner, who once talked to her just as warmly, offering treats. Maggie listened for a few more minutes before deciding to come down from the tree. The man immediately noticed the cat. "There she is. But the main thing now is not to scare this poor animal," he whispered. He slowly approached, holding a bag that rustled pleasantly. A moment later, the man carefully placed the food on the grass and stepped back to a safe distance. For a whole month, Maggie hadn't encountered such fragrant food. She had almost forgotten what food looked like, but her nose instantly caught that wonderful smell. Resisting was impossible, and the cat stepped forward. After just a few minutes, the food was completely eaten, and Maggie, feeling a pleasant fullness, even sighed. It was the most delicious food she had tasted in a long time. The man bent down and extended his hand to the cat, speaking with a gentle smile. "Kitty, my clever girl, thank you. You have no idea how much you helped me back then. If you don't mind, let's go live with me. I promise I'll never hurt you. You agree, don't you?" Maggie looked at the man with some hesitation, but the kindness shining in his eyes made her decide to trust him. Thus began a new chapter of her life. The man was probably talking about something truly important as he continued the conversation. It seemed he was somehow dispelling all the heavy marks that street life had left on the cat's soul. The endless fears, constant hunger, and exhaustion from thirst. His voice sounded as if he was promising her a cozy home, along with the long-awaited sense of security. Believing him, the cat took a few uncertain steps forward, touched his hand with her head, and purred. And suddenly she realized how long it had been since she allowed herself to purr. The elderly man carefully picked up the cat, cleaned her of dirt, and gently stroked her. At that moment, his daughter approached him. A young woman named Maggie decided to pet the fluffy find as well. And then the cat remembered how wonderful it is when caring hands stroke you. Together, they took her from the city park, brought her to their home, bathed her, gave her clean water, and offered delicious food. Later, they decided to take her to the vet to check her health. "Maggie, girl, what happened to you?" the doctor asked in surprise as they entered the office. "Do you know this cat?" the man inquired. "Of course I do," the doctor replied warmly. "This is Maggie, and she had an owner who always brought her for vaccinations, took care of her, and looked after her. But where is she now?" Then the doctor learned that fate had brought these people together with the cat. Unfortunately, it turned out that Maggie's owner had long since passed away. The woman was already elderly and had health problems. The doctor recounted, clearly saddened. And the heirs apparently didn't want the cat, so they threw the poor animal out on the street. What an injustice. After all, Maggie isn't just any cat. She's purebred. They could have tried to find her a new home, posted ads, or at least taken her to a shelter. But now fate had turned its face to Maggie. The man smiled and confidently assured, She will never see the street again. He looked attentively at the cat, as if making a promise. Well then, hello Maggie. Now we are officially acquainted. After an examination, the veterinarians gave her all the necessary vaccinations and treatments, and also explained to her new owners how best to care for her to help her recover quickly. Then the whole family returned home. Now Maggie had a home again, a place where she was loved and cherished. And if you want to hear even more heartwarming stories, welcome to our channel, Flight of the Soul. Here you will find an atmosphere of coziness, lightness, and unpredictability. Every story on the channel is something unique, touching, and memorable. Join us and embark on your own flight of the soul. The link is already waiting for you in the description.